In this graph, we want to talk about the action potential refractory periods. And what that really means is the axon membrane being either incapable of generating a new action potential or requiring a larger stimulus. So let's look a little bit more closely. At the top here, we have our basic action potential sketch, right? Our sodium influx leading to our depolarization limb, our potassium efflux leading to our repolarization limb, a little bit of after hyperpolarization here, again due to potassium efflux. Now, the what's called the absolute refractory period begins as soon as the sodium channels open, right, which is right after this EPSP gets us to the threshold of those channels, and it extends all the way over to here in time when the sodium channels cease to be inactivated. And what that means is on the upswing, the sodium channels are obviously open. But then at the top, those channels close, but they close and essentially lock, right, for a brief period. They become what's called inactivated. And they stay inactivated somewhere into about this range on the sketch of the action potential. And what that means is that no matter how big a stimulus we get from the soma and dendrites, a huge EPSP, you can't get another action potential essentially during this action potential. And that period is called the absolute refractory period, meaning you absolutely cannot get another action potential during that phase. Now, beyond that phase, we can get another action potential given stimulatory input, but we require a larger stimulus. And this is referred to as the relative refractory period. And we need a larger stimulus because, if you think about it, depolarizing input would be either sodium or calcium influx at the soma and dendrites, depolarizing current, whereas those would be occurring, let's point right here, for instance, those would be occurring during some significant potassium efflux. So you'd have cations moving in opposite directions, partially canceling each other out, which of course means the stimulus needs to be bigger. Now you could say, well, it happens all the way down here at the bottom, right, at this after hyperpolarization. Well, the potassium efflux has ceased, at least through these voltage-gated channels, but you're farther from threshold, right? Your threshold being right about here, right above your where your EPSP is taking you, right? EPSP takes you to or above threshold in order to get an action potential. Again, if the EPSP is too small, then you won't get this action potential. Okay, so that's the relative refractory period. Well, what does this mean? What's the point of it? And the point is, and especially we're going to focus on the absolute refractory period here. The point is that during the absolute refractory period, you can't get another action potential, meaning that if our stimuli get closer and closer together here, our EPSP input, right? Our stimuli become closer and closer together. Our action potentials will get closer together in time, right? But they can't, right? We can lose the after hyperpolarization, right? Because we can get an action potential during that relative refractory period. But there'll still be distinct events, the action potentials. And that's essential because if they blend it all together and we just sort of stayed depolarized up here, then you can no longer frequency code your information. Very infrequently does a single action potential actually mean anything. Usually, information is coded in the frequency of action potentials over time, so they need to be individual events. If we were to really ramp up our stimulus over here, right, when we just keep the axon initial segment depolarized above threshold, we see that we run up to right about at this spot, right, when our absolute refractory period ends, and poof, we go right into another action potential. And if we think about this, if we look on an axon, right, so we keep these as distinct events for coding information. That's important. But another thing is that if we open up sodium channels here, right, and we get electrotonic current, and we open up new sodium channels down here, right, get a nerve impulse going. Remember, where we just were, right, on the membrane, right here, if our action potential is occurring right here in time, right here is refractory. If it were not, right, then this electrotonic current traveling backwards would open those channels again, meaning that every forward propagated action potential would generate a retrograde action potential, one behind it. And of course, that would really mess up our ability to transmit information unidirectionally down the axon as we require.